I'm already asking if we can overrun at the end because I don't know about you, but this is a real treat for me to be talking to George Schaller, one of the great zoologists of our time. So it's a treat, I think, for all of us. I'm Brian Leith. I'm an executive producer at the BBC Natural History Unit and an occasional independent. This is my fifth in conversation, and I'm really enjoying them, if only a sort of an occasional hit. We started with David Attenborough 4 years, was it? No, it must be 8 years ago. We had Richard Leakey, we had Mike Salisbury, and last 2 years ago we had Jim Lovelock. And we have a rather different and very special guest this year, George Schaller, who I think we'd all agree is somebody we're all very aware of and impressed by. Here, just a couple of notes I threw together before this was how significant is George Schaller's work? Well, here's just a few sort of glimpses. When Diane Fossey went to the Virungas in 1966, she was following in the footsteps of George's original work, showing how different mountain gorillas were than our expectations. Craig Packer has been studying lions in the Serengeti for 30 years, but his work followed on George's pioneering work on lions from the mid-60s. Alan Rabinowitz, who we've seen recently on the BBC's Lost Land of the Tiger, his work to save jaguars and tigers over the last 25 years has followed in George's original work on tigers in India in the 1970s. And I'm happy to say that George is still very active, and at the end I'm sure he'll tell us a bit more about his current work. I should also say straight away that many of the clips we're going to be showing today are going to be are viewable by you all in Tom Veltri. Tom's at the front here. Tom's made a wonderful film called Nature's Greatest Defender, which is all about George and his work, which you can see in its entirety on Thursday at 1 o'clock in Cinema One. On a more personal note, I first came across George's name when I read this book, The Snow Leopard, by Peter Matheson, about 25 years ago. And if you haven't read it, I really recommend it. It's a most amazing book. In fact, I'll ask George in a minute what he thinks of it. And it's an account of a magical and very moving account of a trek that Peter Matheson joined George in the Himalayas, attempting, I think in the early 70s, wasn't it?
73.
Attempting to find the snow leopard. And I think it's most amazing because this copy of the book is 291 pages long, and the snow leopard puts in its first appearance on page 290. And I sometimes think that, and yet the whole book is about snow leopards, and I sometimes think we filmmakers could take a leaf out of that book in the sense of not hitting people with big close-ups from the word go, but maybe tantalizing and storytelling as well. It's a wonderful read. Peter Matheson's observations of George, who he refers to throughout the book as GS, like he's some sort of, I don't know, sort of ET or something. His observations of George paint a slightly daunting picture, and I wasn't sure quite what to expect in the conversation because Peter Matheson says, and this, of course, remember this is over 30 years ago, he describes George as a lean, intent young man, single-minded and not easy to know, a stern pragmatist, unable to muster up much grace in the face of unscientific attitudes. He takes a hard look at almost everything. So what did you think, George, when you first saw that description of you?
I'll try some grace.
Okay, good. Glad to hear it. What did you think of the book?
I thought it's a great book. A great expedition book, a great internal journey of Peter Matheson's. And the combination, it's the best of that kind that I've read.
Yeah, it's a wonderful account. So to start at the beginning, we've got clips to show over several decades, and I'm going to intersperse them with various questions for George. And at the end, we'll open it up to questions and answers. Where and when did your first interest in natural history come from? I mean, what was the first creature you remember being moved by? Did you have pets? How did it all begin?
Years ago, I read Charles Darwin's autobiography, and in it he says, quote, "I was born a naturalist." All right, this got me thinking. Now, of course, I never had a great idea in my life on anything, but still, When did I become a naturalist? Everybody has two futures. A future of desire and a future of fate.
A future of fate?
Fate.
Mm-hmm.
How do you tease apart your desires? I don't know. I've always been sort of interested in animals and the outdoors.
Ever since you can remember, as a boy?
Yeah. Most children outgrow it. I, for some reason, didn't. And then fate stepped in. People kept asking me, back in 1952, go do a bird survey in the Arctic slope of Alaska. Okay, go. Then my professor said, do you want to study gorillas? I said, sure, why not? And it's been going on through lions. Head of Tanzania Park I met, he said, come and study lions. So I studied lions for 4 years. Then WWF one day said, we want you to run our giant panda project in China. So I said, sure, why not? And my life has been one long vacation, ecotourism, whatever you call it.
Well, it sounds like the ultimate holiday to me. I mean, wonderful. I mean, you've produced some amazing work in there, but it sounds like your dreams have come true.
Well, every project, yes, you do science, which is basic and important. You also look for beauty, for connection with the area and the people you work in. And then you have your dreams. What comes next? What are you trying to accomplish? And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to combine this for over half a century.
You're very lucky indeed. But from the very beginning, your work, I mean, I think something that interested me was that, and this came out of Tom's film, is that from the very beginning, you were clearly involved in conservation. I mean, an awful lot of us here started out as filmmakers with an interest in animals or wilderness, place or an animal, and then got interested in conservation. You clearly were interested in conservation from the word go, weren't you?
This in part depended on a very important mentor that I had, Olaus Murray, who was a well-known mammologist in the U.S. and head of the Wilderness Society, and he took me on an expedition to northern Alaska to survey an area as a possible reserve. Today, it is the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, 30-some thousand square miles, America's greatest wilderness. But he, right from the beginning, said, okay, we'll collect flowers, we collect mosquitoes, which was easy, and we make bird lists and what have you. But remember, and I quote, we're also here for the precious intangible values, and that has always stayed with me. And so wherever I work, I also look for those values. Now, of course, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, you've had the two Bush presidents trying to go in there, drill for oil and ruin it. You have many members of Congress. You have the oil companies. For 50 years, since 1960, we've been fighting the greed and whatever else you have that want to destroy that area. And it also taught me a very important thing. If you treasure something, if there's a natural heritage that a country really wants, you can never, ever turn your back. You've got to keep an eye on it forevermore.
Mm-hmm. In fact, this introduces our first clip, which I'll come to in just a moment. But as you might have gathered, George isn't afraid to speak his mind and is quite political in many ways. And I think his contribution to tonight's Sir Peter Scott lecture debate will be fascinating to hear, and I look forward to it. If we're ready, here's a clip that takes us back to that first, or one of your first field trips in the late 1950s to Alaska. So clip 1, please.
George Schaller's love of the Brooks Range began when he first attended the University of Alaska at Fairbanks to study zoology and anthropology.
Oh, he was a very intense student. I think it was a perfect place for him.
During his days as an undergraduate, he met Kay, his future wife, and his greatest supporter.
I had heard someone outside my dorm window one afternoon absolutely yelling and bellowing. And I looked out, and some fellow was down there just shaking his fist and looking up at the sky. Then suddenly this big black raven came down and lit on his shaking fist. So when we were in class the next day, I said, "Was that you with the raven?" And he said it was, and I immediately found him very interesting.
It was obviously, he was a special kind of guy. He wanted to understand as much as he could, and he knew he could learn a lot just by being there and watching and see what animals did. So he was thinking like the animals that he was focused on. We had no doubts about him doing great things.
Fresh out of college, George became the lead author on the report from the Brooks Range expedition. His work was crucial when Olaus Murie, leader of the team, lobbied Congress to designate the area as the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in 1960.
Now, in that clip, George, we met your wife, Kay, who seems to have been with you on virtually all your trips, and in fact not only Kay, but your two sons, on many of your trips ever since. Has she been an important influence in your work?
Well, she's been the basic rock on which I've depended since we were married, 1957. And it's wonderful to have a partner that not only helps you. If I have panda droppings to analyze, she'll analyze panda droppings. If I need a report edited, she'll go through it very carefully. If I have two sons to raise, she'll homeschool them in Tanzania and other countries. And so she's been so intimately involved, I cannot imagine her not being there to talk to be there as a support. And she truly believes in what I do and supports it, even when I'm gone for several months, which is difficult for her. But I still have that basic support, which has been essential.
Now, the first of your defining studies of animals was of mountain gorillas, and straight away you were shattering some cherished myths with that study. Are we ready to play clip 2, please?
Schaller's discovery that gorillas could be habituated to humans was crucial to the success of his 1959 doctoral research.
The mountain gorilla had a reputation of being one of the most ferocious and aggressive creatures in the universe. And what George Schaller showed was that, in fact, if you did it the right way, the mountain gorilla was amiable and approachable.
George and his wife Kay spent a year living among and studying the mountain gorillas.
The first time I saw a gorilla in the field, it really frightened me. And I had to learn not to be frightened of them. George had shoved me up a tree, and these two big males were coming closer and closer as they were feeding, and I was getting a bit nervous. Then I looked over, and on one branch, lying prone, was a young male. And he had his chin in his hands, was just watching me. And it immediately reassured me.
I know that if you're gentle, placid, near the animals, they get used to you. And the gorillas, you feel like, hey, you're with an extended family.